Are we live in the public yet? Okay, so I do see that we have quorum, and at this point, I will call the special council meeting of Township Council to order. And the first item is adoption and receipt of the agenda items. Could I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Councilor Richter and a seconder.
Moved.
Councilor Arneson seconds.
Your worship, there's been trouble with Granicus, so I just want to make sure that we're
the
all
agenda, sure. So the agenda item, there's one item on the agenda. Well, there's several, but the adoption bylaws for first, second, and third reading, and I'll go over that when we get to that. And other business and termination. That's the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carries. Okay. We now move on to bylaws for first, second, and third reading. A little bit of a explanation. So I had a request from two members of council to call a special meeting, which I did, and we are here today, and that's for the purpose of discussing what we see in front of us, election and political science bylaw amendment, bylaw 5697. There has been some discussion before, and you know, I just got in the office an hour ago. I was able to review everything. There's a report from January 2019. Is that correct, Ms. Bauer? And that report was sent to Council Process Committee for further discussion and work by Council. So I thought that report was on today, but apparently it's not, unless somebody wanted to put it on. But that report is not in the agenda today. What's on the agenda is the portion of the amendment to the election political science bylaw amendment that amends the election political science bylaw 2015 number 5034. The bylaw amends the starting date for duration of placement of local government election signage to be 21 days prior to the general voting day. So that's what's on the agenda. Ms. Bauer, it says placed on local government elections. What does that cover? School board and township, but not provincial and federal? So
yes, that's correct. That would be on school board or township elections. It does not affect the provincial or federal election clauses. Okay.
Okay, so unless otherwise directed by council, we'll deal with B1. So at this point, I would ask for a motion to put B1 on the floor. Councilor Woodward moves it. Is there a seconder?
Yes, Richter.
Councilor Richter. Councilor Woodward, did you wish to speak to it? You moved it. Councilor Richter.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask for clarification here and perhaps whether or not an amendment is appropriate. In the summary report that was sent out from our elections officer after the last municipal election, there was a recommendation concerning fines, and I believe that that report was circulated to council. And if we're looking at reducing the sign period, probably this is a good time to look at the fines as well, or the possible.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask Ms. Bauer. So the portion about a fee and or fines, that was part of the report to go to council for further discussion. I know in my discussion with Ms. Bauer, the timing between now and the election, even though it seems like it's, or the by-elections that's coming up for the school trustee, seems like some time away. It will take some time for them for the staff to get that ready if we were to do that today. So I don't know if it's an urgency to have that one today or if it's something that can wait till we do our CPC. But Ms. Bauer, can you perhaps provide us with some information on what would it take to put that in place if that was the direction of council?
It would take the proposed amendment that was sent to council does include an amendment to the fees and charges bylaw, which would be required in order to collect deposit. We would then have to create an administration system in order to both collect those fees and then refund the fees that were not used in order to collect signs. As council knows, anything is possible, and we would work very hard to enact it for the next election.
Oh, good to know. Thank you. So that helps clarify. So one more thing, Ms. Bauer. So if that was to be added, it would just be it'd be a separate motion, or amended? Would you amend this motion? This motion. It would be a
separate motion.
Separate motion. Okay, so we'll deal with this one, and then if someone wishes to move that, it would be a separate motion. Does that help, Councillor Richter?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Whitmarsh.
Yes, thank you. So I'm just seeking clarification as well. I think I just want to be clear that the only thing we're talking about today here, unless there's another motion, but the only thing we're talking about in this motion is the date in which election signs can go up prior to an election. And the motion here is to suggest that it would be 21 days. That's the only thing that we're discussing here. We're not discussing fees or charges. We're not discussing how close they are to the curb. None of those kinds of details. The only thing is the date.
That's correct. That's just the motion. And one further question from Ms. Bauer. I believe in the report it had a time. Is it the time that signs can go up? Is that in the existing bylaw, or is it at midnight, or is it like when the day begins, 21 days before?
The current bylaw says from the beginning of nomination period. So nomination period, I believe, starts at 9 a.m.
Okay, so would 9 a.m. have to be put into this one?
I actually think I've included it there.
It's included. Okay, thank you. So it would be 9 a.m. It saves everybody running around in the middle of the night. And having it like 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever weeks exactly from election day makes it a Saturday. So folks that want to put up signs are on a Saturday at 9 in the morning instead of some middle of the week. I think it makes it more advantageous. So yes, Councillor Whitmarsh, right now we're dealing with the days.
Thank you. Just another question, Your Worship, and that is around the nomination period. What is the nomination period typically been? And why not have it at the nomination period? I guess I'm wondering, is that a fluctuating amount of time, or what is the nomination period normally from the election?
Ms. Bauer?
No, that's not a fluctuating time. That is set through the provincial government. I believe it's 42 days, but I'd have to look it up to be double sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Long?
Yeah, thanks. Very good. Those are some of the points I was getting to. And I think what mucked up last time is that nomination period, I think generally was 21 days or something like that. I don't remember it ever being as long as it was last year. So I guess what we're dealing with today is the fact that the bylaw references the nomination day instead of the 21. And that's always been that way, because I remember certainly in the couple of elections I've been in that it was never the length of period, which I think was, well, it was 5 or 6 weeks this past election. So anyway,
Ms. Bauer, yeah, I'll ask Ms. Bauer for some clarification. So, so the prior political sign bylaw, this is a new bylaw. It was always this part was included in a regular sign bylaw as a subsection. Is that correct? And in that subsection, in the regular sign bylaw, what was the time frame for when signs could go up in that one? And then it got changed. I think that's where maybe some confusion happened.
I believe it was 3 weeks or 21 days.
It was 21 days prior, and then it changed this. So we want to go back to the 21 days. Okay.
Okay. So that makes, I understand now what happened. We changed it to the nomination period last time, not realizing that there was going to,
it would turn out longer.
Such a long one. And
Ms. Bauer, Ms. Bauer had another point. If you just, Ms. Bauer, what was your second point?
Mr. Backham was kind enough to correct me. It was actually 4 weeks prior to
4 weeks.
Change.
It was 28 days. That's right. That's the number.
Well, I might remind council there was also, I think, maybe unintentionally, but possibly intentionally, to make sure it was the day after Halloween, because there was a little bit of hanky-panky back in the day where we gave the citizens our signs to muck with. So, and that was depending on the election day, which has changed as well. So there's a whole lot of things have changed in the last couple of terms, because the election day now is earlier in October.
That's right. Okay.
So I certainly support the 21 days. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Councillor Kunst?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, I think some of my questions were answered. I was of the thought that, yeah, 6 weeks is way too long, but I kind of feel like 21 days is a little short, especially for maybe new candidates that are looking to get their name out there, and they use signs as a way to do that, especially for people who maybe aren't, in the social media realm. And so I'm just kind of questioning the 21 days, and if maybe we could make it a little bit longer. But I'm was wondering if we're going to have a discussion about the number of days, because I feel like it's not really long enough if you're a new candidate. And I'm sitting here now as someone that has run, and just want to be fair to everybody. That's all.
Okay, well, the only way would be as an amendment to test a council of 28 days or 21 days is what they would like. Councillor Whitmarsh?
Yeah, I think when we consider the days, I think really it's making a consideration of what is the best optimal between making it the most democratic that we can, and of course not having signs up for a long period of time. And certainly the last election, they were up for far too long. I think it was over 40 days or something, six weeks, maybe even 7 weeks. That was a tremendously long time. I know many candidates actually chose not to even put their signs up right away and wait until a little bit longer into the election period. So it seems that, that certainly we don't want signs up for a long period of time. On the other hand, I think we do need to make sure we do the best we can to encourage people to run for council and give newcomers, new people, the best opportunity to be elected. And it always seems a little challenging to me to have sitting council making decisions for future people running for council that might in fact make it more difficult for them and favor incumbents. So I'm open to keeping the process as fair and open as we possibly can, and yet recognizing that there is a limit on how long we do want signs up in our community, and there's certainly those citizens who find that it's too long. And so I would like to amend it to 28 days, which is similar to what we've had in the past. And that extra week, I think, would be a good balance between letting candidates have the best chance to be elected and not having our signs up for a long period of time. And so I would like to make a motion to amend it to 28 days as opposed to 21.
Okay, I'm going to go through those who haven't spoken yet, and then we'll go back to you, Councillor Whitmarsh. Councillor Woodward?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. Mayor. Thanks. So, yeah, we can certainly debate 21 days versus 28. I just want to highlight, maybe through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Back and our Ms. Bauer, that election signage item as something the council would work on is not going to be coming off of the CPC work plan. Would that be correct? So it's still going to be in the CPC schedule despite this special meeting?
Yes, it is. Unless there's other direction from council, but at this point, it's scheduled for a CPC meeting. Yeah,
so I'd like to leave it there and just remind council that this is only for one by-election that's coming up, not intended to necessarily set the rules for the regular 2022 municipal election when we would have a variety of new candidates running. This would be an intent to try to reduce it to 21 days for the purposes of the upcoming by-election. And if it's still in the queue for CPC to be considered next year or leading up to the 2022 municipal election, that we could be reviewing that and considering that in the scope of a full election regarding comments that Councillor Whitmarsh, Councillor Kings made. I don't see 4 weeks as necessary for a school board by-election, and I don't see this as a permanent change, so we would be revisiting this. This is only here to prevent a 6-week signage period for a local school board by-election. At least as I see, that would be something important to do. So I certainly don't see why we need 4 weeks for a local school board by-election. I've been certainly happy to see that discussed further and revisited further later next year when it actually comes back as a CPC item for further discussion. So I would hope that amendment wouldn't be made and we could just proceed with shortening the period here and look to debate that further next year. Thanks.
Then just to follow up on that, then that should be put into this, but then we're changing bylaws back and forth. It should be put in only for the one election because this does change the bylaw for future elections.
Yeah,
next. Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So I want to highlight, the idea is not to change it back and forth all the time. The idea is that maybe we would debate it further next year. We would decide 3 weeks is fine, and we don't need to make any further changes. So, thanks.
Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I do appreciate many of the points that have been made. Also, Councillor Woodward has identified the fact that this is an approach that we are just kind of pre-selecting a particular election. With that in mind, I think it brings up a good point about why would be doing this outside of our other CPC directed. Council has directed that we should take an overview of all of these substantive changes we'd like to consider. So I guess I have a problem with the fact that we are sort of making more work for ourselves and so pre-selecting this one as opposed to others just to change it and then anticipating changing it back. So I would prefer not to do that. And basically I'm in support of having it for 28 days because I think it's fair and reasonable. And I don't think that 28 days personally is too long for the by-election to take place and have signage out there. I think 4 weeks is not overage as far as I can tell. Thank you.
Okay, so I think I've gone through those who've spoken one time. Councillor Whitmarsh had an amendment. Then at least we can test it by vote and then move on. Councillor Whitmarsh, did you wish to make an amendment?
Yeah, I do wish to make that amendment.
Okay, to 28 days. There's a second. Councillor Kuhn seconds. So on the amendment, Councillor Long.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, okay, good. Well, now
On the amendment,
I'm a bit more concerned in the talk of changing it just for this one and that one. So let's be clear on that. I don't think we can be moving the rope or the or the regulations every election, and I don't really understand how one can say that the school board election isn't as important as any other. Every election is important, so that they're equal in my mind. So I don't see how you would have a different period of time now as you would normally. So I would, I'm happy to support the extra week, having thought about it, but I really don't want to see us going back and changing again. So that is very troubling. Now, I guess council will do it what it's going to do, but I would hope that we're not going to move the goalpost around. The other question is, why are we having this meeting? Is it because the nomination period is just around the corner, or has it started?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I should have given some explanation.
Yeah, talk about that.
To make changes for this, to make changes for the upcoming by-election, it needs to be done before the end of this month. So that allows us to do first, second, third reading today. And then we're meeting on the 30th to do fourth reading. So that's the timing issue, is why if there was to be a change to the election political science bylaw, it needed to be done prior to the end of the year. We could have met tomorrow and then the next day, but it has to be a day apart.
I appreciate that. So now the second part is when do we anticipate, or who really knows when the nomination period will open for the by-election? Do we know that, or does it?
I'll ask Ms. Bauer.
Or when the date will be for it?
At this point, we anticipate bringing the election bylaw or the election notice to council on the December 14th in order to appoint the chief election officer and the deputy chief election officer. The nomination period is scheduled in January. I don't have the exact date with me right now.
But okay. Just to be clear, this time, the meeting, we had to have this done by the end of the month, just through legislation.
Yeah, we do have to have this done by November 30th.
I'm just trying to get a correlation between the current process. So currently the process would be nomination period could open when then? In early January? And so you could actually
mid-January. Yeah, mid-January, I think,
with an election.
Getting somebody appointed, getting it going, and with Christmas in between probably.
So if we don't make a change, the point I'm trying to make is if we don't make some kind of change, you could end up with a 7-week nomination period or who knows what. So tying it to the nomination date is I think what we're trying to correct here.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So whichever. Okay, Councillor Richter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do not support a 28-day period. I think that the time of election signs is moving rapidly into an extinction period, as it should, because it's not a sustainable practice. The other thing that's not sustainable about it is the sheer costs that the taxpayers pick up through staff load in terms of the people who regularly violate the sign positioning. Now, we've got positioning requirements in our bylaw right now. The problem is they're not followed, and that just creates work and complaints from the public for our staff to have to deal with. I'm for going with a 21-day period now. Let's see how it works. We're still going to come back and look at this bylaw, and we better get at it this year before the next election period opens up. And if the 21 days doesn't work, then we could look at moving it to 28 days. But I really think 21 days is sufficient. It gives all the candidates a fair chance. Some of the other things that we were talking about for this sign bylaw down the road was having specific areas where signs could go up, so the whole township doesn't get covered with signs. It's the blanketing of signs that is, I think, most upsetting to the public. We've just gone through a provincial election. Now we're going to go through a by-election. I don't think we need a period of signage longer than 3 weeks. And as I say, it's a good test period for when we come back to look at the bylaw again, to look at things like fines, etc., that we can revisit it then if we need to revisit it. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, so I certainly don't support 4 weeks. I don't know why somebody would need to put up a sign on the side of the road for the sake of 4 weeks. I mean, I think I think 3 weeks is plenty of time. I think we get every election, we get constant complaints about this. Way too many signs for too long a period. So I think it's just as long as we're aware of who the ones that are doing this, I think it's pretty clear that the public doesn't want this. And I think that 3 weeks to me is a pretty good compromise between 0 weeks and maybe 2 months to put signs up. I think 3 weeks is perfectly reasonable. I'd be quite happy to set all kinds of restrictions, such as quantities and locations and all kinds of other things, but don't determine that that's not achievable with this council. So I think that this is a pretty good way to try to respond to the public, deal with the constant complaints that we get around election time. And I don't think someone needs signs on the side of the road for the sake of 28 days to get their name out there. There's plenty of ways to do that and lots of mechanisms to do that. I also am uncomfortable that we're doing this at all. I brought this up right after the election, that there might be another mechanism to find a way for incumbent councillors to be setting election signage rules. It's pretty clear that those of us that don't need signs don't want them, and those that do need them want them. And I think that that's part of what we're seeing here now currently. So I would prefer that we respond to persistent complaints of the public. I would love to see some sort of neutral process where we're not the ones doing this. I remember sitting in the audience having previous councils switching back and forth every election between the order of the ballots. Some election, they'll make it a random out of a hat. Another election, they'll rank them in alphabetical order based upon who they think that helps and doesn't help. I don't like to see that. I don't want to be part of that either. I would love to see a different process, but this is the process that we have. And if we hadn't done anything at all, we would have had them up for 7 weeks. So I don't see the need for 4. I think 3 is perfectly enough, perfectly reasonable, and still not as far as many members of the public would like us to go. Thank you.
Councillor Ferguson.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, Councillor Woodward, you don't think I don't want to have my sign out there so people could look at me as they drive by? I had one of my friends say they drove by one of my signs, and I said, how'd you like it? Well, it didn't look like you. Anyway, because I kept using my grad picture. I have a question for staff. Maybe they can help me, maybe they not. Do you know over the years, I don't want to go back 30 years, but do you know over the years what the average or what the plus and minuses have been for sign weeks, if I may? Does anybody know from staff?
Maybe Mr. Backen can. He's gone through more elections than anybody here, so maybe he can help on the sidelines, I should say. Mr. Backen.
Thank you, Your Worship. The one constant has been change. The longest period has been 42. I would say the median is probably 28. I do believe we've had it as short as 21. I think 21 days. So, but it has changed a lot over the last 25 years.
Yeah, I think that's 6. I think last time 6 weeks, that was a bit much, but I think most folks didn't put them up right away. And there was another period. There's an actual election period or something a little bit different than other campaigns, and I think people, as soon as election period started, were considering it. Yeah, I mean, I can live with 21 or 28. It doesn't matter to me. I mean, I still think that some folks are right. Signs do change things, and people do call it sign pollution. So either way in the other, I think I'm prepared to go back to 21 days again. I think a lot can be done in 21 days, and that's at least our position. But if whatever passes, that's fine with me. But I'm going to go with 21 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitmarsh.
Yeah, thank you. I certainly would agree with Councillor Woodward on the idea of some form of different process. It does feel a little bit odd when we as council are making decisions and rules about how we will get elected, or it's a little bit like deciding our compensation. It feels a little bit like that. I think that any decision we make that is more favorable to the current sitting council members is not the best decision to make. And the more restrictive we make the sign bylaw, the more restrictive we limit the time, the more restrictive we do things, the more that it favors the incumbents and us sitting on council. And that is not right. We need to be more open, keep it as democratic as possible. And I'm trying to balance it. I recognize that lots of people don't like signs and don't want them up, but there's others who don't mind them and are looking forward to seeing those signs to help make decisions on who to vote. So I think 28 days is the best compromise between a good democratic process and not favoring ourselves as incumbents. So I would stick with the 28 days.
Right, thank you. So with that, I think it's good. We'll just we'll test this with council and then move on. I'm going to call the question on the amendment to go to 28 days. All those in favor? And opposed?
Opposed.
Okay, Councillor Woodward, Councillor Ferguson, and Councillor Richter opposed. So the 28-day, Councillor Long opposed. So the motion fails on a tie vote. So now we're back to the main motion. So now I had Councillor Richter and Councillor Long to speak a second time. Do you still wish to speak? I was on the other list. I'm trying to keep track. If not, I'll see hands going up. I'm gonna call the question on the main motion.
No, I would.
Okay.
So does this, okay, so there is no amendment any longer?
No, it's 21 days.
Okay, so is it 21 days going to be the situation for the next?
Well, it's in the bylaw, and if this passes, it'll be in the bylaw. Council at any time can make any amendments, just as we're doing now, and make amendments to the bylaws, but right now it'll be in the bylaw, and if it's not amended, it would be moving forward.
So a further amendment would have
changed.
to be made.
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Arnerson is opposed, and it carries. Okay, so we'll move on to other business. Is there any other business? Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So I did request that Ms. Bauer draft a potential. I think it would be worthy to look at updating the fees and charges bylaw to develop some mechanism that candidates are responsible for what they're doing on the side of the road on public property. So I think that was distributed to everybody. I would like to see and use this by-election. And again, we're setting rules. None of us are running in it, hopefully, although technically we can. I hope none of us are running in it.
Why?
Because, so we're not really setting the rules for ourselves here. I think it would be great to.
What if I want to put my picture out there?
You can do it. You can do that anyway.
I'd like to start a process to use this as a potential learning process to have some sort of deposit paid, so that when candidates are putting signs at T intersections and they're removed by bylaw and they reappear the next day, that there's some kind of mechanism to deal with this. I've seen multiple elections. I'm tired of that, and I would like to see some mechanism in place to try to offset the bylaw enforcement costs that we're addressing through multiple campaigns. It's not just one campaign that does that. And I think that was presented to us right after the election in 2019 as an option. Was sent to CPC. I believe that's in front of you. So, Mr. Mayor, I'd let others speak potentially, but I would like to move that as well to see what council thinks of it. I support the idea of a small deposit and some mechanism of cost recovery, so that when people are deliberately not following the election signage bylaw, that there is some kind of penalty and remedy for that.
Thank you. So I know memos run around. It's not on the agenda. I would prefer more time to look at this, and we are coming up with CPC, but if you wish to move it, so we can move along if there's a second, but I don't know what we're moving. There's no detail. I don't have it in front of me.
Maybe Ms. Bauer can outline that. I believe she did distribute it.
Okay, I have to find it again. Ms. Bauer, if you wish to make that, okay, it seems like there's a lot to that. That's what I'm saying, putting it on today's agenda when we haven't seen it, or it's been distributed quickly. We've had a little chance to look at it. Maybe better to leave it on the CPC.
I thought when we approved the agenda that all that was on it was the period of.
No, there's other business on the agenda, so other business that can be brought up. So I am just looking for.
I don't know what
a
to
detailed.
say. It was distributed. It's 2 pages. If people want to defer it or send it away, they're welcome to do that. I would like to move that. It's relatively simplistic.
Okay.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. Could we have the clerk read out what exactly we're voting on here? I might second it,
Sure.
depending on what it is we're voting on.
Okay, I'll ask Ms. Bauer. Do you have the motion that Councillor Woodward is referring to? She's looking. Just give her a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, your mic. Yeah.
The idea about having a task force too to make recommendations to council, I think, is a good one as well. But that's probably for another meeting, I would think, not this one.
Yeah. So Ms. Bauer has the motion. Go ahead, Ms. Bauer.
So the potential amendment would be to add Part 2, Section 2.12 to the sign bylaw. Prior to candidate placing any election or political signage for a local government or School District 35 Langley election, a sign placement fee as prescribed in the Fees and Charges Bylaw 2007, number 4616, as amended, must be posted with the Township of Langley. Election signs found to be in place of this contravention of this bylaw will be removed, and a pickup fee will be charged as prescribed by the Fees and Charges Bylaw 2007, number 4616, as amended. The pickup of election and political sign fee will be deducted from the respective candidate's fee for election or political sign placement. The fee for the election and political sign placement may be refunded or partially refunded should the total of the election or political sign pickup fee not exceed the placement fee. And there would be an accompanying change to the Fees and Charges Bylaw to incorporate the fees. So the fee would be, the deposit would be $750, and it would be a $25 fee for each sign picked up.
Oh, okay. Just as a point of clarification, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the clerk, are we going to be giving this like first, second, and third today as well to go ahead with? Because I thought what we're dealing with here is the 42 days.
Yes.
The provincial government has mandated we can't make bylaw changes affecting an election 42 days before that election.
That's correct.
This
bylaw
would affect that election.
Yeah. So this exactly. So this amendment would be first, second, third. We're doing first, second, third. So it's first, second, third for the bylaw, which would then come for fourth reading on the 30th. So that's what Councillor Woodward's amendment is. So there is no seconder.
No, I'll second it.
Okay, so it's seconded.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'll go through the speakers list that I see up there, and Councillor Long.
Yeah, well, I said it on the outset of the meeting. I'm not willing to discuss changing anything else on the fly here. I think that we should let it go until our deeper discussions later on. And I'm not, I mean, we could be here all day on the fee, because I understand the original staff report mentioned $500. Now it's being upped to $750. I mean, there's all kinds of issues there in terms of, who can afford to put that kind of money up or not. Are the violations really as bad as everybody thinks? I don't know. I pick up lots of other people's signs. So, I really think, Your Worship, that we've had a special meeting to adjust the day. We've chosen the period for putting up signs, which is different from the nomination period, which is a huge difference. Even that, I was hesitant to change any of the goalposts in such a short notice, and I think that this election is as important as any other. But we ought to leave everything until the future. So I would prefer you rule it out of order, but you've accepted it, which is fine. I guess I'm going to not support it, not because I don't agree necessarily with the numbers, but I don't think we should be talking about it today. It's a very deep subject. There's plenty of other things we're going to be talking about. So, somebody mentioned sustainability earlier. Maybe we should insist that signs are made out of more recyclable materials and all. There's all kinds of things that we can do, but there won't be time to do it for this election, for the by-election. If we did throw it in for the by-election, I think that's unfair that we're picking on the school district. Again, as I said earlier, there seems to be perhaps some thought that this is less important than any other, which I don't believe it to be the case. And I don't think it's as bad really as all of that. Now that we've shortened the period of time, I think that'll help immensely. So no thanks, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I agree that substantive changes like this, I don't think are appropriate to add on to I can see the rationale and how it's tied in, but to make this a pilot project for the upcoming election, I don't think really helps our process very much. So I think we need to go back to the CPC. I did have some comments though that I wanted to direct towards this, because it seems likely that it is going to be discussed sometime in the future, perhaps not today as a vote. However, I agree with Councillor Long, $750 on the face of it is a rather large impediment to first-time individuals that are running. And I don't know about anybody else's experience, but I do recognize from other council election periods, some people don't decide to run until the very last minute. And then suddenly they've got a $750 fee that they need to pay up front. And so I consider this in a way to be pre-fining individuals. So you've got individuals who haven't done anything wrong yet, but in anticipation of the fact that they would. And I realize we have parallels in other instances, but for me, those are the kind of things that we usually attribute to developers and those who have the wherewithal to pay for those kind of things. So I don't think it really lends itself to the openness and transparency and inclusion that I hope we all wish to support in our elections. But my other more confounding issue is if I consider a fee that has to be paid by everybody running for local government, I don't know how this could be accounted for by Elections BC. Maybe there is a mechanism, but I don't know if you cannot ascertain at a particular time how much your fee is going to be, because you won't know till the end of the period, basically, how many of your signs maybe have been removed. I just think that that is a bureaucratic nightmare, a bit of a quagmire that we could be entering into. And further to the costs, I'm very supportive of the fact that we need to reduce costs, and anything that we should do towards our elections should be something that reduces them as much as possible. But I think that having an election overall, you can look at it as a societal good. The community is going to advance new individuals in a role of leadership. And therefore, there is a cost, I think, that can be attributed to that. I'm not saying that I am an apologist for individuals that are repeat offenders to leave their signs up and do the wrong thing. That's not the case, but I do think that it's fair that a modest amount of money be invested on behalf of the community so that we can go forward with the leadership that we support 4 years in advance. So those are my thoughts, either for today or a different day. I hope it's not today, because for me today was all about the timelines for the other election. Thank you.
Councillor Whitmarsh.
Yeah, I would like to see us encourage as many people to run for council as possible, to make the barriers as low as possible to run. I think that's the democratic process. It's how we get the best councils that we can. And I'm concerned about a $750 fee, but I do recognize the problem. I do think that there is a problem with some repeat offenders not following some of the rules we have, and we don't necessarily have any teeth. And so because of those two concerns that I have, it's very difficult for us to, I think, answer those questions today. I'm much more comfortable moving that to CPC and having that discussion in a proper format. I'm not sure that we should see the school board election as a pilot test for some new ideas that we're coming up with here. I think rather we should think about it very carefully, possibly have some other perspectives other than councils on this, and look towards how we can continue to move forward by encouraging the most people to run for council with the least barrier to being a council, to run for government as possible.
Thank you. Councillor Richter.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Some good points are being made here. I think while this election could be a testing point in order to see if it's necessary, it may be too much of a testing point that's needed like right now. I think that we're not going to see the aggressive sign campaigns for school board that we've seen for council. And make no mistake, I've been in this community long enough to know there's some very aggressive campaign managers out there that believe that the only way to win a municipal election is to go with a sign campaign, and anything you can do to get your sign in the most visible spot works. So those are the practices I think we need to clamp down on. I agree with what Councillor Whitmarsh has said earlier with regards to we should be sending a lot of these ideas to a task force or a committee of council to give us some feedback on what would be appropriate and what wouldn't. I think that putting a $750 barrier, because it is a financial barrier up, may not serve democracy as well. But on the other hand, those people that knowingly choose aggressive sign campaigns and knowingly violate our bylaw in order to get their candidate's name in the most prominent spot for the longest period of time, I think there has to be some penalty for them. So I seconded the motion. I don't think I'm going to vote for it. I don't think this is as Councillor Arneson said, this is not the place to be pilot testing this because it is a financial barrier. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kunst.
Yeah, no, I'm not supportive. I'm supportive of it going to CPC because I think that there's obviously a lot of discussions that we can have. And I think for me, that would be how would this be, how do we understand how, who's bringing the signs in and how do the people get their money back? Or, it just seems like it could be something that we obviously have to have a little more discussion about how this would be administered. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. I don't mind being the only supporter of a great idea. That wouldn't be particularly unusual. I think I'm just going to read report page 4 that I distributed. This is a report from Bob Wilson, directly after the election, and I quote, "A tremendous amount of township resources were spent on dealing with election signs and responding to many complaints from the public. Part of this review will recommend a shorter time period for the signs to be in place and a monetary penalty to get the election signs back once they've been picked up by township staff." So this idea has been around for a long time. It's being put forward by staff. I'm kind of amazed at some of the comments. I mean, I appreciate the debate and respect that maybe people don't want to do this today, even though they have to in order to get it done in time for the next election. I mean, making a deposit and an accounting of a few signs and returning a deposit, making it sound like the most complicated thing the staff could ever imagine doing, I think is a bit ridiculous. I think this actually is the perfect time to try it out. We have a school board by-election coming up. It seems like a good time actually to try this out and get staff to do it before they have 30 candidates coming up potentially in 2022, which would be the standard number that we see. Again, I don't see this as a barrier to running for office. This is not a fee, as it was called. This is a deposit. Don't break the bylaw and you'll get the money back. I'm tired of now watching multiple elections, candidates flagrantly just ignoring the signage election bylaw, knowing that there's no penalty to doing so. There's no consequences to doing so, not even a small amount of your election accounting. Elections BC would have to account for whether or not this is an election expense, and don't violate the bylaw and you'll get the money back. I'm a little tired of hearing from the public that there's a sign put up at an intersection which flagrantly violates the bylaw. It's reported, it's removed, and reappears twice in the space of 2 or 3 days. And I'm tired of this cat and mouse game with candidates that just blatantly ignore the election signage bylaw. So I would have loved to have discussed this, but an item goes into CPC and it doesn't even come back for 2 years. Maybe we'll get a chance to discuss this in 2023 then after the next election. This was drafted by staff in 2019 in theory. It was distributed. It's not a barrier to democracy whatsoever. A barrier to democracy is the fact that we're allowed to spend up to $38,000 in an election, meaning that if you don't have a few $100s for a sign deposit, you don't have much of a chance anyway. I'm just being realistic. So again, some of these comments maybe sound good in the newspaper, but they're not the reality of a modern election. No one's trying to create barriers to running for office. I'm trying to create some sign of a penalty so that the election signage bylaw will actually have some meaning and actually be able to govern what candidates are doing on our public roadways. Thank you.
Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you. Okay, so what we're doing today is we're looking at something that could be coming into effect for the school district bylaw, the by-election, which is sometime in early spring, January, February, March of 2021. Is that correct, if I may, through the chair?
Yeah, this is amended. I think it'll be coming in for the next by-election. The staff will be working very hard to make it work. I'm getting a nod from staff. Yeah.
So I think it's a little bit onerous for us to put that. And I've heard, I know that other communities have put these types of fees, charges, or deposits on candidates and running. I don't think this is the time to do that. I also heard there's an opportunity for us to, through our CPC system, looking at, or either task force or whatever else it's called, looking at for the 2022 election, which would be a general election, whoever putting their name forward. We're all frustrated. If anybody wants to pick up one of their signs, I've got at least one of them at a barn in Surrey where I pick up all sorts of signs. The barn shared by a bunch of candidates federally and provincially throughout the region. People do, I don't think people intentionally go out to put the sign in the wrong location. We have a heck of a lot of volunteers, all the candidates, their neighbors, their friends. I had my daughter put up some signs right on telephone poles. I had to go out there and take them down. I just thought she was just being smart. But anyway, all of us make mistakes. Our volunteers make mistakes. I don't think they're willful. It might seem that way by some people, but 99.9% of the people running, I don't think are that way. So I think we really need to roll up our sleeves and think this thing through. I will not be supporting it for the 2021 school district by-election. I do appreciate the fact we're having this discussion today. So this idea is not dead. It's an idea that still needs to be discussed. And we also need to look at what other communities are doing as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So I think a lot of, I know the feeling having great ideas that don't always work out. Sometimes you have a great idea and you start peeling back like an onion and start looking at some of the unintended consequences. And certainly I've given this a lot of thought prior to coming here today. And I do agree that I don't want to put a barrier in front of anybody. I know there's people that have run for a local election that don't have the funding behind them, that even putting a deposit up that's refundable would be onerous to them. And here we may be putting, and we may be, I'm not saying we are, but maybe. And if we're putting a barrier to that person making a decision to put their name in the hat, and they may have a lot of good things to offer. So, there's that threat to that. It might be a barrier. I don't know, if it is or it isn't, but the possibility exists. The other thing on the fine, I agree. We don't want to be spending a lot of money. I thought, we should do something. However, it has to be managed. It has to be enforced. The money has to be collected, and then it opens up to abuse. And I've seen my 3 elections, just on my own signs, they get vandalized, they get thrown in ditches, they get moved, and for whatever reason. And as Councillor Ferguson pointed out, sometimes it's well-meaning and well-intending volunteers who maybe don't know all the rules and have to be reminded of the rules, put them in the wrong spot. And for the most part, I've found that candidates are really careful. And there are some that obviously have left their signs up longer than they should be in the town, and others have to pick them up. And that's, I believe, is irresponsible. But I see this almost as a cost of doing business. We run a fair democratic election, costs about $300,000 roughly to run a full-blown election. It might cost $20,000, $30,000. I don't know. We haven't got those numbers in front of us. It'd be nice to have all of those numbers. But it's almost a cost of doing business to ensure that we have a fair campaign for everyone and not put any barriers up. So with, whether it is or isn't, I think the potential that it could be a barrier, it makes me hesitate to vote for this. And I agree. I've thought of this too. How do we make this better? It's a great idea, but I think when we peel the onion, we start to see there's some unintended consequences that could bring hardship to some members of the public who want to run for office. And I'd like to continue to see this as a fair system. So those are my comments. Councillor Long for the second time.
Yeah, just I wanted to make sure that my voice was put to counter what I heard other councillors say, that it's a blatant attempt by candidates or so forth. You know, like has been said by others, they're volunteers, and I think nobody is blatantly, in my opinion, out to mess things up. But there is a lot of hanky panky that happens, I'm sure. But let's be kinder to our volunteers that maybe make mistakes. And it also is quite complicated when we change the rules about intersections, and I'm not sure as it's that clear. So rather than beat them with a stick, I would much rather have better education, and perhaps we could take that into consideration when we have this discussion, or even now as this election is happening in the next few months, that we better educate the candidates, perhaps with a different sheet or something, or even they could sign some kind of a document saying, hey, you've read the signed bylaw rules and you're going to do your best to adhere to them and make sure your volunteers do. I think that would be better. Education is always better than the stick.
Thank you. Councilor Woodward?
Yeah, no, I'll accept my fate on this one. The only one that wants to see this addressed, at least for now, for this upcoming election. You know, I'm just going to reiterate, again, a tremendous amount of township resources were spent on dealing with election signs and responding to many complaints from the public. So, again, this feels like politicians protecting the right for politicians to put up signs. I will just leave it there. I think for me, I'm frustrated and want to help the public. I want to do something about this issue where people put up an election sign at a T intersection. They're reported, it's taken down and replaced the next day. That is not a volunteer making a mistake. This is not me criticizing volunteers. I'm not even going to respond to half this stuff. This is about, you know, some campaigns are very well organized in putting up signs. And in the last week, having bylaw change, and our volunteers and other volunteers running around trying to get the bylaw enforced because some lived up to the bylaw and some don't. And I think that we need to have some mechanism to address this. Others don't agree that we need a mechanism to address this, and that's fine. I accept that. Thank you.
Thanks. Councilor Whitmarsh?
Yeah, I don't think it's fair to suggest that the rest of council has no interest in helping the public on this issue. I think every one of us have stated that there is a concern, and we recognize the concern, but there's also a number of different issues that come up with a fee structure like this. And it's something that to debate it today, to try and put it in as a pilot for a by-election that's coming up with the school board doesn't make a lot of sense. But that doesn't mean that we don't recognize that there's not a challenge. So I think that's unfair. I think every council member here would like to see those who are intentionally breaking rules to have some kind of system in place to try and prevent that. But I agree with most of the other councillors. I don't think that most of the rule breakage is intentional. I do think it's volunteers who may not know the rules, or it's signs getting moved, or they don't know where they go, or signs get blown down and fall in a ditch and you can't find them. That happens all the time. Signs get vandalized. All kinds of things happen. I don't think there's very many people going around intentionally trying to find illegal spots to put up signs and hope that they can not get caught. So, you know, I think there is a problem, but we are also going to create a problem with the suggestion that's coming in today. So absolutely, every member of council, particularly me, I want to solve the problem, but the way that you're suggesting it, Councillor Woodward, is not the right way to do it.
Councillor Richter.
Yeah, I actually take exception to Councillor Woodward's comments that we don't want to solve this. I'm in complete agreement with Councillor Whitmarsh on this. We know it's a problem. We know it needs a solution. I just don't think rushing it through today is the time or the place to come up with a solution. I think a solution is going to be much better crafted if we have a nonpartisan committee of the public to review our signage bylaws and come up with some recommendations to council. And the key phrase here is nonpartisan. And I hope that we will be able to achieve this. I think we're going to have to look at this over the next year, absolutely, and get some recommendations into this council's hands at least 42 days before the next municipal election, which is coming up much sooner than I can believe already. So I think But I do think, and while there are comments made about volunteers, I do think that there needs to be a way to hold the aggressive sign campaigns at bay. And I doubt very much that this by-election is going to be an aggressive one. But if it is, then we'll certainly have ammunition going forward to any further revisions to the bylaw. Thank you.
Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I think there's all sorts of things that happen during campaigns with signs, and I can't think of how many mistakes my volunteers make. In fact, the rainiest day of the year, and I guess during the election, they put the signs up right up at the intersection. We had to go out within an hour in the rain and take them all down. So anyway, but there, Councillor Woodward, your frustration is genuine. That's just during an election. We have another problem down. I'm sure many people in the community have it, but I'll use my example. We have a street here that borders Langley Township and Langley and City of Surrey, and every single day people are dropping garbage there. And when you have volunteers picking up, you have the City of Surrey picking stuff up, and you have the Township of Langley. That's a real frustration. So there's all sorts of frustrations with people in the world. Thank you.
Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Worship. Just quickly, I wanted to put in my public support for the idea that it is very challenging, and the optics probably are not the best, I know, for us to discuss what should be done about our own sign bylaw, because we're in an inherent conflict of interest. And so I do agree that at some point it would be helpful to prioritize this discussion and have it sooner rather than later, and to find a body similar to the one that was put together to try and determine council remuneration for the same reason, is because you don't want the individuals that could potentially benefit to be the ones having the discussion about what that looks like. So I think that that's something that we should do, look at best practices from other communities. Let's draw upon our neighboring experience to find out the kind of cost recovery that's reasonable, balancing of the interests, because more than anything, I agree with my council colleagues. I think that we do want to see any systemic issues being addressed, but it has to be done in a way that I call fair and proportionate. And so I think it would be most helpful if we had a task force or some other independent party that was able to give council some recommendations as to what we could do to address the issues. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I see no further discussion. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? And opposed?
Opposed.
Where's my hand there? Okay, so Councillor Whitmarsh, Mayor Froese, Councillor Long, Councillor Arneson, Councillor Coons, Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Richter opposed. All right, is there any other business? We don't have Councillor Davis here to...
No, Councillor Davis phoned me. He phoned me to say termination.
All right, moved by Councillor Long, second. Councillor Arneson, all those in favor, opposed, carried. Thank you very much for coming out on short notice, and enjoy the rest of your Saturday. It's actually a nice sunny, it was sunny, November day. I see sun coming in, so enjoy the day. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you for calling a special meeting. Okay.